Hello and welcome to Wayland's Wisdom. Today I'd like to speak with you about a fairly complex topic, and this is a re-record of an original recording about this, because the topic is in reality fairly complex, and I've been trying to condense the information and the explanation of it into usable and easy to digest wording and video length as well. So I'd like to speak with you about the social aspect of politics, and I'll also touch on the social aspect of rhetoric as well, as I believe that's quite an important tangent on the social aspect of politics. Now, what do I mean about the social aspect of politics? So, rather than purely focusing on politics as an exchange of ideas or a debate over policy, what I'm talking about is something more akin to realpolitik, but more so in a much more down-to-earth sense, or perhaps more so it's a description of the nature of politics. Now, what I'm going to describe to you in this video is not only apparent in politics, but it occurs in our day-to-day life as well. It's something which isn't bound to politics, but for our purposes, I will be talking about it in regards to politics due to the lack of attention given to it. So, what I mean by the social nature of politics is as I said, the interactions between people and the things you do outside of debate or outside of policy. And I will talk about the social aspect of debate in the section of this video on rhetoric. So it's the way you live your life and the way in which you interact with your political opponents and your political friends. Now, the reason why this is important is because you are able to build certain relationships with people which will become advantageous to you, rather than simply being a member of this party or a member of the opposition or whatever it may be. Instead of merely being somebody's adversary, you are instead someone who is seen as within your opponent's in-group, which seems or sounds paradoxical, but in reality, there are circles or layers of in-group and there are layers of belonging. You see in your own friends and family that those that you are more loyal to are more likely those who are going to be more directly related to you. Now, this isn't the case for everyone, but it's in however your friends and family are situated in your own life, you will have reasons, and there will still be these levels and hierarchies. So your friends may come before your own blood relatives. So you still have these differing levels of relationships with people, and your loyalties and their importance to you, that kind of thing. So in politics, you have the same thing. You may have, for instance, if in the UK you have the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, who have been for around 100 years or more, been firm rivals, and at some points quite vehement opposers of each other. But in general, they follow a very similar paradigm, and they, as members of Parliament, are all part of the group of being MPs. So a Labour MP is more likely to talk to a Conservative MP than they are to talk to a Conservative party member. So this is someone who's outside of the in-group of MPs. Now, of course, this isn't always the case, but it seems to be that, you know, if even talking as an outsider, the impression I've gained from those who are on the inside is that this is very much the case, and there is this term of the Westminster bubble, meaning that these MPs are usually in an echo chamber because they don't speak to many people outside of it. And of course, we can see with a reasonable lens that these parties all follow a very similar ideology, but with different approaches to it. And when an outsider party emerges, whether that be an independent party or you know, some sort of somewhat more extreme party, whether it's to the right or the left, they are purposefully kept out until, of course, they then gain enough of a footing within Parliament itself, and so they then become part of the in-group. So you have these in-groups, and I believe it's good for us as non-politicians, but even if we ourselves are politicians, to remember this, that there are in-groups within politics, and to try and learn how to navigate them, and try and learn how to be in as many of them as you can without sacrificing your own beliefs and yourself being compromised in terms of your integrity, and for your followers to know without you telling them that you are within these in-groups for influence and prestige to further the goals of your party and your belief system. It's also good for us to remember or be aware of these things so that we can protect ourselves against them, and if needed, fight against these unofficial institutions if needed, rather than be, as we already have been, sidelined and left astray in the wilderness because of these social factors. So there are many approaches to this in light of this knowledge, and I think it's up to us as individuals how we deal with the knowledge that these in-groups exist and people gain power and influence due to them. Okay, so the next thing I want to speak about is related to the social aspect of rhetoric, and it will bleed into that later subject that I'll talk about. And that is that how you are as an individual will gain you some influence and rhetorical power when speaking with your adversaries. So if you are already friends or on good terms with one of your political adversaries, and you end up debating them, whether officially or unofficially, public or private, they will then be likely to be more charitable to your views than if they were not your friend or acquaintance. And so they will then be more likely to be willing to change their minds than if they were purely your enemy on a social level as well as a political level. Now, where this can be detrimental is if you yourself fall for their friendship and become too softened and too receptive to their beliefs and their rhetoric, rather than staying staunch and steadfast in your own ideas and your own values and your own morality, rather than being too receptive to the point where you turn coat. So we have this idea then of befriending your enemy whilst remaining enemies in order to gain a voice on the other side to parrot your ideas, or perhaps to change the paradigm, shift that Overton window to your side, rather than further creating division. Now, also in your friendship with this person or these people, this will further, on a sub-rhetorical level, so on a level below debate and below any form of argument, they will be more endeared to your side through you. So they will see that their opponent isn't, or their opposing side aren't as individuals as bad as they once thought. And, you know, on a level before or beyond or even below rhetoric, they will then come into your side through that. And I think this leads me on to the social aspect of rhetoric. Now, I think I touched on how you are as an individual in what I just said, and that is one of the greatest aspects in the social aspect of rhetoric, in that if you yourself as an individual are contemptible, morally bankrupt, have a history of bad deeds and poor arguments, and these kinds of things, in your personal life you are not as good as you could be, or perhaps not as good as your beliefs are. This will reflect badly both on your beliefs and on your side. So you must stay away from the temptations that life brings to you. And, you can think of this in a religious way or not. But the reality is, if you are willing or wishing, rather, to be involved in politics or any form of rhetoric whatsoever, you yourself as a person must be morally sound. You see, even in the realms of life where morality doesn't come into our arguments, such as in the world of science and history, being of poor moral character makes you far less reliable as a source than if you were someone of moral character. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that your beliefs therefore are wrong because you have a poor moral character, and that those people who have exemplary moral character therefore then have good beliefs. I've known a few people who have bad moral character, but their beliefs or their ideas are quite sound. I'm primarily speaking in the non-moral schools here, so in the sciences and histories, and a lot of people who are of good moral character but have terrible ideas and terrible conclusions. Now, obviously, for a lot of things, especially in the philosophical and the political realms, our ideas are usually a reflection of our moral character. In spite of that, you will still have people who, despite their moral character, have good or terrible political or philosophical beliefs. But as a general rule in philosophy and politics, due to the moral nature of these studies, moral character, generally speaking, reflects or is reflected in our beliefs rather than beliefs being totally separate. So, in practice of what I've just said, you need to, if you're engaging in debates or arguments in a public sense, even if it's just within your community or just within your family, you must have a good moral character and be untempted but not ascetic in your day-to-day life. You see, if you take on an extreme personal life in contrast to your contemporaries or your peers, then you'll be seen as some kind of zealot or some kind of cultist. Now, an example of this, perhaps, If you are, say for instance, it doesn't really matter what beliefs or political or philosophical you have, but if you take on an ascetic lifestyle where you eat very little and what you eat is very simple, and you only drink water, you don't touch any alcohol or any, you don't have anything that's, you don't take in anything that's pleasurable, and perhaps if you exercise, your exercises are very extreme, or perhaps they're very simple yet robotic and regimented. If your life is, if your personal life is perceived to be without any joy and without any warmth and delight, and or without any form of social cohesion, people will view you as too much of an outsider, or they will first view you as too extreme as a person, therefore then an outsider, and therefore then your beliefs, being a reflection of your individual or personal life, will then be seen as extreme or plain wrong. So it's important to be temperate rather than hedonistic or too ascetic. This is the reason why many politicians will be happy to be seen drinking a beer, but will never wish to be seen only ever eating simple food or engaging in illicit behaviour. It's a nice middle ground, and people quite like the middle ground. And it is a shame that a lot of people prefer a more centrist position in politics and philosophy. And it's a shame that a lot of people want to live a live and let live attitude and lifestyle, rather than one that's full of virtue and a firm understanding or a firm basis in morality. However, people will want to go with what's safest, generally speaking. So it's good to try and embody this rather than being too eccentric. Now, a bit of eccentricity goes a long way, especially if you're trying to be a politician or trying to move up in your political status. To have an interesting factor about you is good, but if it's too extreme, either way, whether it's hedonism or pure asceticism, you will be seen as some form of zealot, or in some way or another. You'll either be seen as a Satanist or some kind of mad monk. And the mad monk thing can work, but it's a very short period of effectiveness. So that's the social aspect of rhetoric. Well, that's the precursor, rather, to the social aspect of rhetoric. Now, when you're performing your rhetoric, the social aspect comes in with this. You need to, if you're trying to convince someone of your point of view, you need to help them understand that you're not there to belittle them, that you're not there to chastise them or to make them an other, but instead to either teach them or guide them, or perhaps even at its seemingly weakest, merely try and get them to understand your position and try and see the good in your position. Now, there are many ways of doing this. You can do this through convincing them that your beliefs are in line with their values. Or you can perhaps do it in a way in which you are arguing that your values, or that the values your beliefs bring, are more morally sound, or more logical, or perhaps just in some way better than their values. Not because they're stupid, not because they're evil, but because they are mistaken in some way, or perhaps, you see, it's a very difficult one to try and achieve. That's why so many people simply try and align their own beliefs with their opponent's values, But if you try and get them to try and change their values enough, you don't need to, it would be impossible to try and get someone to change their values completely. Say, for instance, you're talking to someone who is completely pro-abortion, and you yourself are anti-abortion. Either one of you trying to get the other to flip on such an issue with big distance between those for and against is quite difficult without, or is incredibly difficult without trying to reach compromise, which neither of you really wants to do. And so, although one of those parties is more likely to compromise than the other, but trying to get those positions to flip is near on impossible without shocking them, and you usually need some form of media to shock them. And with the example I gave, it's very difficult to use that media or show that media without yourself gaining some form of backlash for showing something so horrific, for instance. So you instead then need to shift their values enough. Try and get them to, or try and push them or pull them in the ways that you need them to be pushed or pulled in order to get your values to click enough in order for them to, at the very least, see that your beliefs or your positions are either based in sound judgment and morality, and also based in reason as well, that your beliefs are logical and that their moral foundations or their moral outcomes are also good. But you don't need your values to align so perfectly. You just need them to align enough in order to get the ball rolling in that direction. And a lot of this is down to semantics and word choice and the way in which you present yourself. You see, our morals and values are quite often based off of a vibes-based system. I know it's not a very academic word, but I think the word vibes is a very good word to use for this, because it demonstrates, or it describes the situation almost perfectly, that our morality is not necessarily based off logic and reason in terms of how we view it. It may be based off logic and reason in terms of its foundation, but in terms of how we view it, we view the morality of another, whether they're an outsider or an insider, but a stranger in terms of our moral compass. But how their values are presented, despite the vast difference between them, can build alliances in very strange ways. You'll see in the modern day how radical Islamists have managed to become aligned with radical leftists, despite their moral, political, and social values all being diametrically opposed, to the point where these people should be eternal enemies of each other. However, they're not. But it seems to be almost a parasitic relationship. They almost feed off of each other. But this video isn't about that. But it's an example where, because of how each other's values are presented, for the leftists, the Islamists' values are presented as anti-colonial. But for the Islamists, the leftists' values are presented as, well, again, also anti-colonial, in a sense that the leftist is breaking their own society down from the inside, and the Islamist is breaking the society, maybe perhaps of their own country, but they see it as very different from themselves. So the Islamist is removing the influence of the West through direct opposition, whereas the leftist is bringing it down through subversion. And so they then have an unlikely allyship through that one value. And this is how you can also tell how important various beliefs are to different groups by who they ally themselves with. If someone allies themselves with an unlikely ally, someone that on almost everything they have opposition with, but on only one or only a couple of things they are somewhat sided on, that is how you tell how important something is to a group. That you would side with someone who'd otherwise be your enemy just because you have this one goal. You can see this on the right as well, with various parts of the right being pro-Israel, for instance, purely because Israel is fighting an Islamist force, and the right is largely anti-Islamist. Despite the values of the right and the Islamists being far more similar than the values of the Islamist and the leftist. However, because of the almost existential problems or goals that each group has or have, the primary goal for each person is what's most important at that time. So for the right, it is upholding the values and the achievements of the West, whilst defending it from those who seek to destroy it. Whereas for the left and the Islamist, it is, or for the Islamist, it's defending themselves from the West by trying to destroy it. And for the left, it is to defeat the West, or to start revolution, to defeat the West, for them to then gain control. And so you have these differing groups, as I've said, who have completely opposing values, completely down the line, but because of how their values are presented, as in that they are, using the same example, because they are presented as all of their values are presented as being anti-colonial, for instance, two groups can then meet because they both have that same goal in being anti-colonial or anti-West. And so with that knowledge then, you need to think about how you present your ideas and your beliefs. You need to look at where your similarities lie with your opponent and look at where their strongest or most extreme goal is, or their most important goal rather, and see if in any way it lines up with yours or with your most important goal or any of your other goals. So say for instance you are someone who's pro-capitalism and you're talking to a communist, but you both have the same goal in wanting to increase employment. Now, you both then can come together on this and try and discuss it. Now, so you come together on the issue of unemployment, and you both have somewhat similar ways of approaching it, and you can try and figure out a way and almost compromise, but always seek to get your compromise to be at the very least 60-40 your way, so that it's more in line with your ideals. And if it works or if it fails, you can then point out where it went right or wrong. If, say for instance, if it works, you can say, well, that was the influence of my capitalistic ideas. And if it goes wrong, you can say, well, my capitalistic ideas were compromised by the communistic ideals. So that's how that works, and it's not very virtuous, and it's not very Hollywood and storybook, but it's how things work, unfortunately. Now, if humans were to do what works this, in spite of their morality, we'd be living in a very different world, and it'd be a very strange and possibly barbarous world. Now, if we did only what was moral, then we'd still be living in a very strange and possibly barbarous world. But this strange compromise we have of logic and morality seems to work fairly well. But logic and morality aren't really as diametrically opposed as some people think they are. By logic, I'm really talking about something like youth functionalism, and morality being more so the feelings that people have. And these can be described more esoterically as the masculine and feminine nature of life. The masculine being more functional, the feminine being more feeling oriented. And we can try and think about things in that way if that's helpful. So the overarching idea I have really on the social aspect of politics is really that you should be trying to show your opponent that there is a space for them in your realm, and that they can always switch sides because you will be there to welcome them, and that we needn't not be so adversarial to each other, because at the end of the day, most politicians and political theories in any form of power in the UK at the moment are all basically based off the same sort of loose liberalism that they've been for the past 85 years or 100 years, or however long it's been. And that it's only really with the infusion of extreme beliefs, primarily communism, that things have changed so drastically and grimly, and that we kind of need to fight against this. Now, as I said in the beginning of the video, the social aspect of politics is more of a description, but that description does give us a few things to think about as we go forward in life. And that is that we can use the social aspect of politics to our advantage, but we can also use the social aspect of politics to change the way in which we do it in order for our political system to work more efficiently and work more virtuously as well. I can see the Americanization of our political system happening each and every day, and that we will have two big blocks of ideas, like we already do, like America does, and friends and family will and have already been separated and made enemies of each other. Now, although I think that it does serve a purpose to make enemies of each other in a Machiavellian way, in terms of bringing about actual real change in the long term, we should be seeking to bring our political enemies into our fold, in terms of once they have come to understand us in a more charitable way, and in a way in which is more similar to the way we believe, then that is where we then begin to bring about unity within the country. And we can be done with the name calling and accusations, and instead look out for each other as friends and family, rather than look out for each other as economic units, which is the way that our elites, whether they be politicians or bureaucrats or in the media class, in the way in which they see us. So I hope that any of that made sense and that any of that was useful. But I believe it's an important part of politics is to understand the social aspect of it, because so much of what we do is based off of pure, shallow debate and idea, that we kind of lose the human aspect of politics, and we lose the human aspect of each other, and things can get a bit hairy and violent. And I know that there's a lot of reason to be upset with your friends and neighbours who participate in less virtuous forms of politics, but at the end of the day, we've still got to live with each other, and we'd be better off uniting over common goals than to simply be on one side or the other. So thank you very much for watching, and if you're able to, try and use some of this advice and these descriptions in your path moving on, and come back for another video. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.